Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Brian Shager, President of the UAE Singapore Business Council, EXCO members of the UAE Singapore Business Council, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mei Chan from DP Architects, representing the organizer, UAE Singapore Business Council, or better known as UAESBC. It is indeed a great pleasure to welcome you to another presentation of the UAESBC Quarterly Talk Series. The series aims to inform audiences on pertinent topics of interest delivered by experts or prominent figures in their respective fields. Before we start off, let me first share with you the outline of our program that is being displayed below. For your reference, we have also shared the URL of the program on the chat screen so you can refer to it anytime. As you can see from the program outline, after the welcome remarks and speaker introduction by the UAESBC President, our featured speaker, Ms. Joanna Patterson, will be invited to present her talk. Following that, we will open up the floor for questions. If you have a question for the speakers, please click on the raise hand icon on your Zoom screen. You can click on the raise hand icon at any time during the presentation, but we will only take your questions during the Q&A segment. When it's your time to ask a question, we will activate you as a panelist and prompt you to turn on your video and audio so that everyone can see you while you ask your question. You may also choose to type your question into the chat window if you prefer to ask your question anonymously. However, priority will be given to those who want to ask the question in person. If you have any technical issues, you can chat with our admin in the Zoom chat window. To begin today's event, I now have the pleasure to invite the President of the UAE Singapore Business Council, Dr. Brian Shager, to give his welcome remarks and introduce our speaker. Dr. Brian, please.
Thank you very much, May. Good afternoon to all, and best wishes to all of you for the Year of the Tiger. This is our first quarterly talk in 2022, and indeed I think the topic is a very timely topic, very much in vogue, and we all know how COVID has impacted us drastically over the past 2 years. Our businesses, our mobility, our social mobility, travel internationally, in so many ways, supply chain disruption. COVID has been a real dampener for the global economy and the way we as people are used to a certain way of life. I think we are showing signs of an emergence from this dreadful period, but yet we're not out of the woods yet. So I think it is quite appropriate that for this first quarterly talk in the year, we look at COVID and how it has impacted particularly one of the most affected industries in the global economy, which is the aviation industry. Now, this is a very important industry for Singapore as well as the UAE, as we are both global aviation hubs. We serve not just our immediate hinterland of Asia-Pac or the Middle East, but actually as far as the airline industry is concerned, in both these countries, it serves the whole world. The connectivity of the airlines, particularly in the UAE and Singapore, is global in its reach. And they have been drastically affected, it's a fact. And the airline industry has struggled over the past 2 years to cope with these challenges. And it'll be nice to hear from an expert about the various strategies and the challenges they face and the way forward. Therefore, the topic today for our first quarterly talk is the new normal in the airline industry, resilience amid uncertainty. And we are delighted to have with us an expert to talk about this particular topic. And she's Joanna Patterson, Vice President Sales APAC for Etihad Airlines, who are of course a member of the Business Council. Let me say a few words about Joanna's very impressive background. She joined Etihad in 2021 in August as Vice President Sales for the APAC region. She's responsible for the overall commercial strategy of the region, further growing Etihad's trade and corporate relationships, and playing a critical role in navigating the growth and success of the region as it emerges from the pandemic. I'm sorry, the screen seems to be not working very well. Okay, it's getting better now. Thank you. Joanna brings over 20 years of rich experience in the airline and business travel industry, as well as a thorough understanding of Asia, having lived in Shanghai for 3 years before moving to Singapore for about 6 years ago. Her career spans senior management and sales positions in China, Germany, and the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and Singapore as well. Prior to joining Etihad, Joanna worked in Singapore for United Airlines, where she was Director of Sales for Southeast Asia region, and FCM Travel Solutions, where she served as Director of Account Management for Asia. Before that, she was a key player in the growing global sales for major Chinese and European airlines, such as China Eastern, France, KLM, Lufthansa, and BMI. Now, her passion for the airline industry has been the driver of her whole career. It has enabled her to grow and develop strong multicultural teams around the world, built long-lasting relationships across the travel industry with corporate clients, as well as being a mentor to many colleagues. So during her free time, she has some very interesting hobbies. She travels a lot, cycles, has photography, and also has scuba diving as one of her passions. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Joanna Patterson, the speaker for this afternoon's quarterly talk. Over to you, Joanna.
Thank you, Dr. Brian, for this very kind introduction. I'm honored to be here this afternoon with you. We are actually in the room together, a few of us, which is great, and unfortunately, speaking to the rest of you virtually. So I wouldn't say that there's a new normal as such. I would actually call it a constant evolution. If I think of, the topic around the new normal in the airline industry. And the reason I'm saying that is if you think about the last 20, 25 years, we've been through many other crises in the airline industry, which has also brought on changes. And every time we've had a crisis, we've talked about a new normal. So think about the past, smoking on planes, you had a lighter with fire, or restrictions on liquid in your hand luggage, you could bring what you want. Even having your laptops in your bag without taking it out at security every day. So we really got used to all those new restrictions, and whatever the pandemic will leave behind us, I know that we'll all adapt, whether it's us in the airline industry, but especially us as travelers. So I'm going to cover a few topics in my presentation. I promise I will have time for Q&As. Because I think travel is really a topic that belongs to everybody in a very close and personal way, and not just in a business way. So, if you think about 2 years ago, we were all learning about this strange cold affecting China and slowly spreading. And suddenly the borders closed and 2/3 of the world's passenger airplanes were grounded. That's over 16,000 planes. That was unimaginable. And those pictures that you see right now is really a reminder of what happened. The only airplanes at that time still operating were for repatriation of people and for transport of freight. And so started the most challenging years of crisis in the aviation industry. So, what has been the impact really for us? And not just for us, I would say for the whole world. So I think we can safely say that no one was prepared for what COVID brought to us. It spread worldwide without acknowledging any borders. It's had an impact on all industries, on all sectors and all aspects of our lives. And it had devastating economic and financial losses, bringing definite uncertainties to our lives. Airlines, we know, we're an essential part of world's economy, and the knock-on effect has been dramatic. Many jobs were lost and a lot of lives affected. If we look at some of those numbers in the graph, there are some really predominant ones. International air passengers went down 60%, actually more than that. Airports lost revenues above $125 billion. And international tourism as well, it's estimated it's 1.3 trillion revenue loss. So that is massive. And you can just imagine the knock-on effect on all of us and not just on our industry. But our industry, from an airline perspective, I think has been hit very, very hardly. So if I move on to a little bit more detail specifically on COVID, it really brought the global aviation industry to a standstill almost overnight when the borders closed and we had to ground our fleets. This graph will really show you how passenger traffic reacted and how it reacts to crisis, economic downturns, terrorist attacks, and other pandemics. And clearly, when you see the sheer drop that COVID brought, it's definitely the worst that we've ever had. At the height of the pandemic, we saw a drop in revenue because of passengers stopping to travel of 99%. And that's how we actually started that crisis. It's definitely started to come up again. And depending on what part of the world, it's been much, much quicker at coming back to not 2019 levels, but getting closer to that. What I would say, though, is that it's taking much, much longer than we all thought. You know, when I was asked when the COVID started, Singapore closed, I thought, okay, by Easter, I'll be traveling again. And then I thought by June, I'll be traveling again. And that was 2 years ago. And I would definitely say that the APAC region is going to be the slowest in terms of recovery. So there's two areas that we also look at when we're talking about the pandemic, is the effect that it's had on markets with a domestic travel opportunity and those who are relying on international travel like Singapore. So if I take you to a quick visual where it will give you a real feel. So as I mentioned, the APAC region is going to be the slowest to see the recovery in terms of passenger numbers. But we all know we were the first one in that crisis, and we certainly will be the last ones out of it. So if you look at the graphs showing domestic versus international, a domestic market would be China. Okay, so China, we know, last year actually exceeded revenue numbers in terms of their passengers in the domestic market to even before 2019. So they've been very lucky because they have that huge market. We know that international travel is actually maybe not that simple, but from a market perspective, it's working very well for them. If you think of a country like Singapore, that's a completely different world, because Singapore, as a hub, and as Dr. Brian mentioned, we really rely on travel. We're really an international hub. So if people can't fly in and out, then it's absolutely going to delay the recovery, not only of the airline, but the recovery of the whole ecosystem around an airline, the whole industries that are connected to airlines. So APAC, if you look at the drop of our international travel, has been actually the biggest drop in terms of percentage point in all regions. And that's really going to be a challenge for us. So the question is, when will this end? And it's definitely unclear at the moment of when we will emerge from it and what the full impact is going to be of the pandemic. So if you think about what an airline brings. So if I'm traveling as Joanna, I'll take a taxi to go to the airport. So I'm spending money. At the airport, I might buy a coffee. I'm spending money. I might even go into duty free. I'm spending money. I fly wherever I'm flying to. In transit, I might buy more duty free. I get to my destination. It could be a holiday, a business trip. I'm spending money in a hotel, on taxis. on food, shopping, souvenirs. So if that travel doesn't happen, a lot of people get really affected. If you have a look here at IMF's projections for the world GDP, the one done in 2020, which is the dotted line, versus what was updated in 2021, clearly shows that apart from China, the rest of the world is far behind the projections that were made. For the airline industry, we know we've seen dramatic revenue losses. And you can see that in those two circle graphs between 2020 and 2021 versus 2019. The forecast at the moment for 2022 versus 2019 pre-pandemic, it's still going to be a struggle. We still think that from an international perspective, it will be less than 40%. Domestic is definitely doing better, and it's probably going to be around 13% decrease. End of November, I really believed, and actually the whole world believed, that 2022 was going to be a strong recovery year. And then came Omicron. So uncertainty is unfortunately a very accurate word to use for us. One thing is sure, is that 2022 is another year of transition until we can talk about recovery. So, knowing what the impact was on the aviation industry, airlines' first priorities at the start of the pandemic was to survive. And I really mean the word survive. We had to completely shift our priorities into different business areas. So, what was our focus? Number one, it was around cost. So I mentioned earlier at one point at the height of the pandemic, our revenues dropped by 99%. So we had to dramatically cut costs. It was really a question of survival. And airlines had to make some very tough decisions. Fleets were grounded and then remained partially grounded, retiring aircrafts earlier than planned, jobs were cut, office leases were renegotiated. Every single cost was scrutinized. At one point, a salesperson couldn't even invite a client for a coffee because we had a zero expense policy. So dramatic. We were hemorrhaging money. And how are we going to get revenue back in when people were not able to travel? And that's where cargo actually came. And cargo has been really the area bringing in revenues into the airline industry. So for many airlines, cargo was a vital source of income when passengers stopped traveling. Passenger aircrafts became cargo airplanes, and in some cases, airlines even took the seats out to make it full capacity for freight. We also know that cargo, except for bringing revenue to us and helping our survival, really became a lifeline for the society in itself, delivering critical medical supplies and vaccines around the world, as well as keeping the international supply chains open. And we know even to date, there is a shortage and a breakdown in those supply chains because there is simply not enough cargo and not enough freights when you even think of ships actually operating today. The other area that became number one priority, clearly after security from an airline perspective, was really to look at our travelers' welfare and rebuilding their confidence in flying. Airlines around the world did a great job at communicating and socializing what their new processes were around safety and around sanitization. Sorry, I'm French. Sometimes I struggle with my English. So, informations around HEPA filters. No one really knew what HEPA filters were. And suddenly the whole world were checking, do airlines have HEPA filters in their aircraft? How we were deep cleaning our aircraft. What was being done at every single step of travelers' journey, from arriving at the airport, checking in, waiting in the lounge, boarding an airplane, on an airplane, and arriving at destinations. And when you actually think about it, I must say that that has had a very positive result in the view of cleanliness in all aspects of our lives. And this is something that hopefully will stay in the future. The other area that we focused on was technology. Mobile technology really became a massive acceleration in terms of development. Just think of all the different apps that we have nowadays in terms of contact tracing, like Trace Together in Singapore. Think of how many things became touchless, not just in shops when we go shopping in restaurants, but in airports, checking, boarding. When you're on the plane, there's no menu or magazine in front of you. It's all digital. And airlines have developed apps to really help, travelers navigate to all the travel requirements that can be very difficult to actually keep on top. And then sustainability. So sustainability has always been on airlines' agenda, but the pandemic has really moved it faster to the top. So it's not only a business priority, but it's also a social responsibility for us. Airlines globally have actually committed to achieving a net zero carbon emission by 2050. And what are they doing? It's about new aircraft, new technology in aircraft. It's about using sustainable aviation fuel. It's about reducing single-use plastic on airplanes, etc. And there's so many examples, and I could talk on that just for an hour. So we can all play part. As an airline, we can help consumers make a more sustainable choice and become much more environmental focused. So as you can see, airlines haven't actually just wasted the crisis while we had less passengers and our daily jobs were impacted. We really used that to bring focus to projects that we had in the pipeline and accelerate their development. So now we can look at what will be our recovery. So hold on while I am actually getting my technology to work. So let me talk a little bit at how we recover and what we're focusing on. The biggest change for us in the airline industry has no doubt been around how we plan our network, how we plan our flights, where we're going to fly to, and our scheduling, and deciding on the destinations that we fly and with what capacity. So pre-pandemic, airlines did this twice a year. We had a winter schedule and we had the summer schedule. In the last few years, it has been an ongoing review. So we've had to really reduce, restructure, and rebuild, reducing the size of our operations to be sustainable. Because let's imagine we used to fly double daily to Kuala Lumpur, and suddenly people can't travel in and out of the country. Well, we're not going to be able to sustain that level of flying. So we'll be looking at how many flights do we keep? Yeah, and maybe it becomes 3 flights a week, as an example. Then restructuring the network and being agile. And agile is a word that you'll hear a lot when you're talking to airlines. And it was being agile in really capturing the demand, because depending on the changing market expectations, depending on the travel restrictions, where were people allowed to travel and what were viable destinations that might not have been the ones in the past, but the ones today. So if I take an example in Indonesia, the only place Indonesians could go on travel in the last year was actually to Istanbul. Guess what happened? Lots of airlines started focusing on Jakarta to Istanbul as a destination. And then next is about rebuilding our network and making sure that where we know people can travel, we stimulate demand, and we also work around the different changes in booking habits. People used to plan in advance. Now they plan very last minute because they're waiting to see if the restrictions stay, if something changes, and if they're okay in traveling. So being flexible and agile on how we plan our network has really become the main thing in us looking at recovery. And we also need to work around some very important challenges that we are definitely facing. So there are key areas that I'd like to touch on in terms of the challenges faced by the airline industry. The first one is around corporate travel. Corporate travel, the reason this is a key challenge for us is this used to be the high yield revenue stream for airlines. However, today, travel managers are really going to have to re-educate their businesses on the value of traveling for meetings, to meet clients, and especially managing their CFO's expectations, because they're really going to scrutinize the budgets. Very famously, the Amazon CFO announced after the first year of COVID that he had saved $1 billion in travel costs. He's not going to want to spend that again. So we're faced with virtual meetings, which have replaced face-to-face meetings. They're faced with travel and expense budgets that have been reduced, and combined with the shift to remote workforce, as well as duty of care of the employees when they're traveling, this means most likely less business trips to start with. The other area for us is around commercial revenue. So we make our revenue when people travel, whether it's corporate or whether it is leisure. But the pandemic has also created a lot of job losses, and it's led to lower disposable income. So in addition to that, the digital world has really exploded, and that will have an impact on people traveling less and also how much they can afford. You know, I can sit at home and I can visit a museum virtually in Australia while I'm having a cup of tea in Singapore. And that's the reality of this acceleration in digital. So that is a massive challenge for us in terms of the revenues. Another challenge also is the whole travel industry has very stretched resources due to, one, COVID illnesses. People are sick, so they're not traveling, they're not working, but also a shortage of staff. You know, I mentioned earlier, airlines, airports, everybody, we really cut headcounts. Now we're all hiring again. And guess what? We're all hiring again, and the staff who are applying need to be retrained. They may be coming from a different industry. They might be rehires, which is great, but there's also the competition to attract talents. And that is an absolute challenge for our industry. You'll know it. If you've been to a hotel over Chinese New Year, you will know that they didn't have enough staff. You will know when you go to a restaurant that they're sometimes understaffed because of all those challenges that we're facing in the wider travel industry. Then the next area that I would like to talk about is market distortions. What has happened because of the pandemic is that we've suffered such heavy losses in revenue that we have also exited some of the markets because we simply couldn't survive if there was no demand. What does it mean? It means less competition, less capacity, less connectivities, which will absolutely have an impact on when you as a traveler have a choice. So if I'm flying via the UAE to New York, for example, in the past, I probably could choose a flight on a daily basis. My connectivity would be 2-3 hours. Now I might only have 3 flights a week, and my connectivity might be 6 hours. So that's absolutely having an effect when I think of market distortion. And the last one is regulations. And let's face it, it is complicated. Each country is different. There are changes that can happen overnight. We never know what the government or a government is going to do when there's another variant. And traveling has actually become stressful. I know I went back home for the first time to France and I was stressed. And I'm a traveler and I found it very demanding. So I think that's the biggest worry for travelers is if you're traveling and you test positive in another country and you get stuck, what happens? So how can we help in our industry in terms of supporting travelers in the future? I think that's really what I will sort of end my presentation with. We know there's a massive pent-up of demand. Tourists and corporates are eager to travel. So how do we rebuild trust and confidence and help travelers not to be stressed? So travel agents have done a great job, by the way, in helping step by step with all requirements connected to travel. Planning it based on your passport, on what country you're going from, to, and all that. Airlines on their website have a lot of information. And it really, depending on your travel destination, you can go and click and find the information. Once quarantines are lifted and the fear of getting stuck in the country is no longer there, that's when travel will normalize again. Yeah, normalized travels means for me being able to just jump on the plane without all that planning, like planning days and weeks in advance. It means going on holiday, visiting friends and families. And it means that business travelers will return back into planes and come out of those virtual bubbles that everybody lives in, like us today. You know, we are talking to you virtually. I want to do this in person. I want to reconnect. So for us as airlines, how do we help that? How do we ease travel back into our life? On the other hand, it also means for us bringing back capacity, being able to do long-term planning rather than very short ad hoc destination focus. The one thing though is it will never be back to business as usual. Yes, what we've learned is that becoming more agile and we've been much more innovative, and that is not something that's going to change. So with that, I look forward to welcoming you on board one of our flights in the very near future. Thank you.